Let me describe something and you tell me if it sounds familiar. It's a Monday morning, you're in the office, the team is there, and you look at the call logs from last week, and the numbers are not where they need to be. They're not even close to where they need to be. And when you go back through the week in your head, trying to figure out what happened, you can see it clearly. There were inspections, there were proposal documents, there were follow-up emails on deals that are months old. There was a lot of activity, but almost none of it was prospecting. So you have the conversation. Again, you pull up the numbers. You remind them what they committed to. You ask them what got in the way. And they have answers. They always have answers. And none of the answers are wrong exactly, but none of them add up to the number that's on the board either. And then the week starts again and the same thing happens. If you're carrying the prospecting for your team, if new business in your pipeline, in your agency runs primarily through your relationships and your activity, today's episode is for you. Because I want to talk about why that's happening, and it's not what most commercial real estate principals think. Welcome to episode 275 of Commercial Real Estate Leadership. I'm your host, Darren Krakowiak, and I'm here to help commercial real estate principals to build an agency that can run without them so they have the choice to work on or off the tools. Now, the obvious explanation for a team that won't prospect is that there's a lack of motivation. They're not hungry enough. They're too comfortable. They'd rather handle incoming work than go out and find their own. If you could just light a fire under them, they'd perform. Now, I've heard this from many principals, and I understand why it feels like the right diagnosis, but in my experience, it's usually wrong, or at least it's the wrong place to start. Because here's what I observe when I look at commercial real estate agencies where prospecting isn't happening at the team level. The team is not idle. They are busy. They're genuinely busy with real things like appraisals and proposals and inspections and negotiations. The problem is not that they're sitting around doing nothing. The problem is that the things they're spending their time on are the wrong things. And they've learnt over time that the pipeline will be okay without them prospecting, because it always has been, because you've always made it okay. This is not a character flaw in your team. It's a rational response to the environment that they've become used to. If you go to a restaurant and the bread basket keeps getting refilled every time it's empty, you don't go around looking for bread elsewhere. You've learned that the bread will appear in the basket. And your team has learned the same thing about the pipeline. The prospecting dependency in your business is not a team problem. It's a structural problem, and the structure was built over a period of time by the decisions that you made about what to do when the pipeline needed attention. So let's give this a name, and we're going to call it the buffer effect. And once you see it, you're going to recognize it everywhere. The buffer effect is what happens when the principal absorbs the consequences of the team's prospecting shortfall personally. Not deliberately, not even consciously in most cases. It just happens because when the pipeline is thin, the principal feels it immediately and they do what they've always done. They go ahead and they fill it themselves. They get on the phone, they call a contact, they push a stalled deal forward. And then the pipeline stabilizes and the team never had to feel the full weight of what happens when prospecting doesn't occur because the principal buffered them from it. This is the mechanism. The principal sitting between the team and the consequences of their behavior, which means the team's behavior never changes because the consequences never felt real. Think about what this looks like in your business right now. When your agents don't hit their prospecting targets one week, what happens? Well, probably you notice, you might have a conversation, you might track the numbers, but the rent still gets paid. The deals in the pipeline still move forward. Nothing collapses. And that happens because you're making sure that nothing collapses. The team don't feel the urgency because you're absorbing it. And as long as you're absorbing it, they won't feel anything. So the natural response to this when a principal realizes the prospecting isn't happening is to tighten the accountability. More tracking, clearer targets, more frequent one-on-ones, public dashboards, morning meetings where everyone reports on their call counts. And these things work for a while. When the attention is on the numbers move. Agents do more prospecting when someone is watching. I've seen this play out consistently. But then something happens. It might be a busy patch, a good run of deals. The principal's attention shifts somewhere else, and the prospecting numbers drift back because the accountability structure was holding up the behaviour, not the team's own understanding of why the behaviour matters. The accountability conversation says, I need you to prospect. The structural problem says, why should I, when it works out anyway? And until the structural problem is addressed, the accountability conversation is fighting upstream the whole time. This is not a criticism of accountability, by the way. Accountability matters, the one-on-ones matter, the tracking matters, but they're most effective when they're reinforcing a structure that already makes the right behavior rational, not when they're the only things keeping the desired behaviors alive. So what does change it? In my experience, there are two things, and they need to happen together. The first is making the consequence of not prospecting real and visible to the team. Not threatening, not punitive, just real. Right now, when prospecting doesn't happen, the consequence lands on the principal. The pipeline thins, the principal fills it, and the team doesn't see the cost. What changes the behavior is when the team can see and feel what a prospecting shortfall actually produces, when the gap in new business becomes visible to them, not just to you. This might mean being less quick to fill the gap yourself. It might mean letting the team sit with the discomfort of a thin pipeline for long enough that they feel it. It's uncomfortable to do this because the principal's instinct is to always protect the business, but protection has a cost. And the cost is that the team never learns what they need to learn. The second thing is being explicit about what the expectation is and what happens if it's not met. Not in a threatening way, in a calm, clear, specific way. This is what prospecting looks like in the business. This is the number we need. If we're consistently not there, that tells me something about whether this is the right environment for you. Said once, calmly, without anger, and then followed through on. What I've seen is that when a principal says something like that clearly, not as an ultimatum, but as a clear statement about how things are, behaviours start to change. Not always immediately, but the team starts to recalibrate because there's something real now on the other side of not prospecting. I want to give the whole pattern a name now because naming it is the first step to breaking the cycle, and let's call it the Pipeline Dependency Loop. And it works like this. The principal prospects and generates new business. The team sees that the pipeline is fine and they don't really feel any urgency to prospect. The principal's prospecting drops when they're busy with other things. The pipeline thins. The principal fills it again. The team's prospecting habit never develops. The loop repeats. Every time that you fill the pipeline when the team should be filling it, you complete another cycle of the loop. And the loop gets harder to break the longer it runs because the team's dependency on you becomes more entrenched and your own habit of filling the gap becomes more automatic. Breaking the loop requires doing something that feels counterintuitive for most principals. Stepping back far enough that the team can feel the gap. Not abandoning them, not letting the business fall apart, but being deliberate about not absorbing the consequence that they need to fill in order to change their behavior. The pipeline dependency loop is not a team problem. It was built by the principal and it can only be broken by the principal. But breaking it doesn't require working harder or having more conversations. It requires changing what you do when the gap appears. If you're in this loop right now, if you're tracking the call logs every morning and having the conversations and the numbers still aren't where they need to be, I want to tell you something. The effort you're putting in is real. It's not wasted. But if the structure around you hasn't changed, the effort will keep producing the same result. This can be fixed. It doesn't require a different team necessarily. It requires a different structure. One where prospecting isn't optional because the business can't absorb the shortfall because you've stopped absorbing it. If you'd like to think through what this looks like inside your business, let's have a conversation. You can find me on LinkedIn. Darren Krakowiak is my name. Send me a message. Tell me a bit about what's going on, and I'll get back to you personally. That is our episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will speak to you soon.